Hello, welcome back to my channel. Somebody asked me to do a video on the 3 oaths and the Hasidic view. So I'm going to go ahead and do that today. Now, it might not be what you're expecting, so stay tuned. It should be interesting. So if you know my story, I am a Balish Tshuva. I came from a basically non-religious family. We kept some things, but we didn't keep everything. And then I entered the Hasidic community when I got a little bit older, when I was in my teens. Now, when I was growing up, my family was very, very pro-Israel. I used to walk around with an IDF shirt. I used to have a Magen David necklace, and I was just so proud of the state of Israel. And then when I came into the Hasidic community, I had a very dear friend who was really watching out for me, and she wanted to make sure I was comfortable and that I was taken care of. Really a very good-hearted person. And one Shabbos, I was over at her house, and she pulled me aside, and she said, I see that you're wearing a Magen David, and I want you to know something. I don't want to offend you, but I do want you to know that if you want to blend into the community, you should probably remove that necklace because it's going to set you out as not being part of the Hasidic community. And honestly, I was very confused by this. I didn't get it. I didn't know the mentality at that point in time, and I just knew that this was my association with the Jewish people. But I listened to her and I took it off. And over the course of time, I came to learn that the state of Israel was not always positively viewed by the Hasidic community. Now, there are some chasidim who are pro-Israel, such as Bells, but then there are other chasidim that are very anti the state of Israel. And that's something we're going to talk about today. In certain aspects of the Hasidic community, there is this very anti-Israel bias because they say it is based upon the 3 oaths that are found inside of the Talmud. Now, the 3 oaths are actually based upon a verse in Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. And that verse is seen to relay the message that the Jewish people are not allowed to enter the land of Israel and possess it before the time of favor that God has decreed upon it. Meaning we can't push the redemptive process sooner than it's supposed to be, before Mashiach comes. And we do have a precedent in history that the Jewish people are not supposed to rush the redemptive process. And we actually see this from Shevet Ephraim, who tried to leave Egypt before the set time came. And what happened was 200,000 people from Shevet Ephraim were slaughtered in battle. Now, because they suffered heavily, that is definitely seen as a sign that God was not with them. But here's the thing. If we're just looking at that point right away, we can already see that it doesn't exactly fit what happened in the modern day state of Israel. In the modern day state of Israel, not only did the Jewish people actually enter the land, but they've had miraculous battles, and we see prophecy being fulfilled. We see the land blooming as it was prophesied, giving forth its fruit. We see the prophecy in Zechariah fulfilled that children will be playing in the streets, that old men and women will be sitting there. We see prophecy coming to life before our eyes, with the Jewish people thriving in the land of Israel. So if the Jewish people being slaughtered because they rushed the redemptive process is a sign that God's favor was not there, that is clearly not what we're seeing in regard to the modern state of Israel. But that's just a side point. Now let's actually talk about what the 3 oaths are and look at them in context, and then we'll analyze if they're actually valid today. So the 3 oaths are like this. Number 1, that the Jewish people should not ascend b'chayma, which is seen as a massive uprising, a tremendous amount of people, or as in amassing an army from outside the land of Israel. Number 2, that the Jews should not rebel against the nations of the world, and they should not try to possess Israel before the nations agree to that. Now, the 3rd oath is not upon the Jewish people. The 3rd oath was actually put on the nations of the world, and it says that the nations agree not to subjugate the Jews too much. Now, we're going to look at these in context and see if the Jewish people living in the land of Israel today, making the Aliyah movement, the state of Israel, violated these 3 oaths. Now, before we get there, I actually want to say that not everybody agrees that these 3 oaths discussed in the Talmud are actually legally binding. There are some people who say it's only midrashic and it's not legally binding at all. But for those who hold that it is legally binding, let's ask the question, does the modern day Aliyah movement violate these 3 oaths in any way? Okay, so if we look at each of these, we find that the first clause is definitely not violated because the Jewish people didn't come up b'chayma. They never came up as a massive uprising going into the land of Israel and possessing it by force. They certainly did not amass an army from outside of Israel to attack Israel and to gain control of it. They actually trickled in. So the modern day Aliyah movement is plane loads of people returning to the land of Israel, one by one trickling in. So they definitely did not violate the first oath. Now, the second oath is that the nations have to agree to the return of the Jews to the land of Israel, and we should not try to go against them and rebel against that authority. Now, if you learn history, there was something very, very bizarre and unusual that occurred on November 29th, 1947, in the General Assembly of the United Nations, which is like the most anti-Semitic organization out there. They held a conference and they actually voted with a majority of 33 to 13 that the Jewish people could return to the land of Israel and establish an independent state. That was a very, very, very bizarre event that was clearly done b'siyata d'shmaya. So the Jewish people received permission to return to the land of Israel in 1947. The Jewish people returned with permission, therefore not violating the second oath. Now, the third oath, remember, is incumbent upon the nations of the world, that they should not oppress us too much. Let's just look at history. We've had the Crusades, we've had the Inquisition, we've had the Holocaust. We have extremely unfair, destructive, evil treatment of the Jewish people all around the nations that we have lived in. Now, there's a legal concept that if one party who is bound by an oath does not fulfill their oath, and there's like this contract between parties, then the other side is released from the oath as well. So if the nations of the world broke their part of this covenant, this package, then we are no longer legally bound. Not that the modern day Aliyah movement is violating any legal part of these three oaths if they are even legalistic and not just midrashic. So when I stop and I look at this, I see that there is absolutely no issue with a Jew making Aliyah today. Moreover, it's very important to bear in mind that according to the Ramban, living in Eretz Yisrael is actually one of the 613 commandments inside of the Torah that is binding upon all generations. We have to have our hearts set toward Eretz Yisrael. That's what a Jew is supposed to do. The entirety of Tanakh is talking about the holiness of Eretz Yisrael and how the Jews belong there. Yes, we were exiled, but the goal is to get back there. Now, we've spoken about these three oaths now, and I might have presented it in a light that you have never thought about. I mean, it's something that I didn't think about. I just kind of went along like a sheeple, not questioning anything for many years, even though I noticed that there was so much division caused. People were hating on each other because, tzioini, and it didn't make any sense to me. If a sect-specific ideology creates sinas chinam, then we have to ask the question, is this really of God? Is this really heilig? Is this really true? So if this presentation of the three oaths strikes you as a Hasidic person as, wow, maybe I didn't have the full picture, maybe I didn't truly understand things, you might be wondering, like, how could our religious leaders have gotten this wrong? And this is a very, very important question. Because yes, you can have heilige people, you can have tzadikim, you can have good people who make mistakes. But our community is so used to holding people up, revering them, and believing them to be almost godlike, which is a very serious issue. And that's why we have the Tanakh. The one thing that is never going to make a mistake is the Tanakh. And we see inside of the Tanakh that even Nevi'im, even our prophets have made mistakes when they were not speaking b'nevuah. Good, holy, God-serving, God-fearing people whose names are written inside of Tanakh have made their own mistakes when it came to understanding and apprehending God's will for the world. I'll give you two examples. The first example is where King David HaMelech, he speaks to Nasan HaNavi, and he asks him if he can build the Beis HaMikdash, and Nasan HaNavi tells him, yes, go ahead. But then he walks away from David HaMelech, and he gets a nevuah, and he's told, go back, you made a mistake. You were speaking out of your own understanding. But David HaMelech is not going to be the one that is going to build the Beis HaMikdash. It's going to be Shlomo HaMelech. It's going to be his son. And Nasan HaNavi has to go back to David HaMelech and tells him that he made a mistake. Another example of this is in Daniel chapter 9, Perek Tes. Daniel is conflating two prophecies of Yirmiyahu. He's not understanding why the Babylonian exile has not yet ended, why the Jewish people have not returned to the land of Israel. And he's very confused. So what does Hashem do? Hashem sends him a Malach Gabriel, who comes and explains to him that he's conflating these two different prophecies. Because even though Daniel was heilig and Hashem called him chamud, he was precious in God's eyes. He made a mistake because he was a human being. Human beings, no matter how heilig they are, no matter how much we love them, no matter how much we revere them, they can make mistakes in understanding. Which actually I want to branch off from there and say even our greatest leaders inside of the Tanakh, inside of modern day history, we can see that our great leaders sometimes even make mistakes in their personal lives, and sometimes they even sin, and sometimes they even do bad things. We need to stop sanitizing Tanakh and stop expecting our leaders to be malachim, expecting them to be perfect human beings, because no human being is perfect. And it gets in the middle of our relationship with God. When we expect a human being to make all the decisions for us, when we expect, human beings to be absolutely perfect and they can never fail, they're completely infallible, then that not only interrupts our relationship with God and causes us to rely on a man rather than God himself, it also confuses us. And if we see a religious leader behaving in a way that hurts somebody else or commits some kind of inappropriate behavior or whatever it is, that can be earth-shattering, absolutely devastating, because we hold people so high up. We need to realize that human beings are not infallible and they can make mistakes and they can make bad decisions. And it should not get in the middle of our relationship with Hashem. So when it comes to our leaders, appreciate their good words, appreciate their teachings. And if something doesn't sit well with you, search further. Dig deeper. Look inside of Tanakh. Look inside of the primary sources. Discover your own relationship with Hashem. And you can accept guidance, and you can accept wisdom, and you can understand that sometimes you need to consult with the rabbinic authority in order to get a halachic ruling. But to hold people up on a pedestal, that you can't make a move without them, that it completely blinds you to the fact that there might be a different way of thinking, that's very, very dangerous. And that's how people fall into cults. It's not a healthy way to live. So that's why we will always have to have our baseline as Tanakh. You see, Tanakh is never going to fail us. And Tanakh was written for every single generation. So I want to go back and I want to see what Tanakh has to say about the whole going to Eretz Yisrael, the Aliyah movement. And I think you might be kind of surprised. So the first thing you need to know is that because Tanakh was given for all generations, the things that are canonized inside of it are things that we should be using as a guidebook. Tanakh is not a history book. Tanakh is a guidebook. It's teaching us how to analyze current events and situations and how to respond to those current events and situations, how to navigate them, how to understand them. So when we go back and we look at the Babylonian exile and the return to Eretz Yisrael, we actually gain perspective on how we should be relating to that in our current day situation. So what's important to note is that after the fall of the Babylonian Empire, Koresh, Cyrus the Great, he arose and he gave the Jewish people permission to return to the land of Israel. He believed that he had a God-given mission to allow the Jews to return and to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. And he did, because in Yeshaya it says very specifically that Kodesh is called a Mashiach. He's called Mashiach, which means anointed. He was given the task of politically allowing the Jewish people to return to the land of Israel. And he was called Hashem's Mashiach. He was anointed for that task. Unfortunately, once the land of Israel was opened up and the Jewish people were allowed to return, not everybody had ears to hear. Not everybody returned. Only 42,360 Jews responded to the call, and they returned to the land of Israel in the first wave. But guess what? Those 42,360 people are held up for great merit inside of Tanakh. And the Tanakh goes through a lengthy description describing who they are and putting their names for posterity. Now, that was the initial movement returning to the land of Israel. And after that, there was a second movement led by Ezra Sofer. And he brought around 1,500 people with him, a much smaller group. The Frima Yidden were very comfortable in Bavel. They didn't want to leave. And these Yidden that returned to Eretz Yisrael, and their names recorded for merit, the interesting thing about them is that many of them were Mechal Shabbos. There were some who were intermarried with Goyim. These were people who were secular tzionim, and they're recorded for merit inside of Tanakh. You see, these Yidden may not have been keeping all of the mitzvahs, but they had one massive mitzvah, Yeshuv Eretz Yisrael. What they did was heilig and pure and good in God's eyes. They returned to the land of Israel as soon as the doors opened up. And once they were there, Ezra HaSofer took upon himself to teach them Torah and to mend the ways, to bring them back. He encouraged them to leave their non-Jewish wives. He taught them Torah. He lifted them up. Yidden had been very, very far away from Yiddishkeit. But they were recorded for posterity inside of Tanakh as having done an incredible deed by returning to establish the land of Israel. Now, of course, the Frima Yidden might not have perceived them that way. They might have been thinking of them as just tzionim, maybe even rishoyim. But here's the thing. One of the secrets of the Tanakh is that when something very halach happens, it happens in weird ways, in ways that we're not expecting. Sometimes the halachite is too great that it needs to come down in a cloak of darkness. It needs to come down in a way that we don't openly perceive. And that's the story that we're living now. It was non-religious Zionists who returned to the land of Israel as soon as the doors to Israel were opened. And many Frima Yidden are fighting it, not sensing the incredible halachite of what they have done. And it is true that the secular state needs to be cleaned up, just as the Zionists needed to get back on track in the time of Ezra. And that's our job. That's our job as Jews who live a Torah life, to lift other people up, to bring them back to Torah with love and with compassion, not with condemnation, not with our sect-specific ideologies that put people down. That's never going to help anything. That only creates an elitist attitude. That only creates division and separation, and it blinds us and makes us think that we're better than other people. It's an attitude that is not in line with Torah. The truth is actually very simple. If we learn Tanakh, we learn how to fix everything. And every community has problems. We're all great people, but sometimes we have bad ideologies in one area. We might have great ideologies in other areas. And if we learn Tanakh, we fix them. We fix the division issues. We fix the false ideas about Mashiach. We fix the false ideas about Tzionim. We fix it all if we get back to Tanakh. And this has to be the avodah of the religious community these days. Get back to Tanakh, learn what it actually says, and teach it to our brethren. They're Jews just like us, and we have to love them. And we have to understand that maybe they weren't privileged to grow up the same way that we were. Maybe they don't know the taste of Torah. Maybe they fight battles every day that you know nothing about. Have a little compassion. Have a little compassion and love them. Love them, and they will come to love the Torah too. And that brings me to another point. Talking about how Tanakh will clean up all the different issues. The issue of an army, right? Now, an important point going back to the three oaths is that the three oaths does not allow us to amass an army outside the land of Israel. But if we learn Tanakh, we see that in Zechariah, the Jewish people have to have an army before the final battle of the war of Gog and Magog. We see it because the Jewish people are settled in the land where the nations gather around them and attack them. And you know what it says there? It says that Israel is going to have an army that's going to fight to protect their residents. And they're going to be the weakest of them, like David HaMelech. And the house of David is going to be like the angels of God. We need an army. If people rise up to kill you, you are obligated to protect yourself. And of course, there's the question of who's going to go serve in the army. Again, learn Tanakh. It's all there. Go learn. The religious community needs to learn Tanakh in order to understand how to teach the non-religious community. And together we will adapt. And together we will build. And together we will become one cohesive unit to serve God. We all have what to correct, but we all belong together. So the important takeaway, in my view, is that we all need to have our hearts set toward Eretz Yisrael, and we all need to be learning Tanakh. And even if we're not ready to make Aliyah tomorrow, at least realize that maybe you have absorbed ideas that are not actually in line with Tanakh. And we might need to recalibrate a little bit. It doesn't mean that everything that you've learned is fake, but it means that in this area there might have been a mistake made. And it's okay to say, you know what? I'm ready to learn more. We need to want to live in Eretz Yisrael. We need to want to bring back all the people who don't know the beauty of the Torah. And we need to work towards that goal. And even if we don't make it in that first wave or in the second wave, and even if we are going to be one of those people who wait until Mashiach comes, at least open up your heart and say, you know what? I want to be in Eretz Yisrael. And it could be that Hashem is going to arrange events that we literally get pushed back. And a person should know that they're doing absolutely nothing wrong by returning to Eretz Yisrael before Mashiach comes. And in fact, according to many, many authorities, it's one of the greatest mitzvahs out there. So be strong and realize that we are in the footsteps of Mashiach. And our goal is to get back to Eretz Yisrael and to live a Jewish life there together with our brethren.